"You need to stop this fishing circus immediately." Margaret Sullivan's voice cut through the November morning. Her designer heels clicked on my dock planks. Behind her stood two men in suits, one I recognized as her attorney, the other holding official documents. "This is your final warning, Mr. Whitmore. Either comply with community standards or face the legal consequences." I looked up from baiting my hook, the morning sun barely clearing the Georgia pines. "Margaret, this is my property. Has been since 1948. What I do here is none of your concern." "Wrong." She thrust a paper toward me. "This is a cease and desist order. Your fishing activities violate aesthetic covenants, and your dock is an eyesore depreciating property values for the entire subdivision." The attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, we're prepared to file suit in Fulton County Superior Court if you don't remove that structure within 30 days. I glanced at the document, then back at the 3-pound bass I'd just released. "You do what you need to do. I'll be right here, fishing on my family's land." Margaret's face flushed red. "We'll see how smug you are when this costs you everything you own." She spun on her heel, nearly losing her balance on the weathered planks, and marched back toward her Escalade. The morning air smelled like honeysuckle. I had no idea that within 6 months, Margaret would accidentally poison hundreds of homes with chemicals in a vendetta that would spiral out of control. I didn't know I was sitting on a 75-year-old legal document that would turn this nightmare in my favor. My name's Daniel Whitmore, and at 56, I never imagined I'd be in conflict with a woman who probably spends more on her manicures than I make in a week. I'm a third-generation electrician, spent 30 years rewiring commercial buildings across metro Atlanta before transitioning into renewable energy consulting when my knees started complaining about attic crawling. The kind of guy who fixes things with his hands, speaks plainly, and believes your property line is where my business ends and yours begins. This 14-acre spread in Brookhaven, Georgia, with its spring-fed lake, has belonged to my family since my grandfather bought it in 1948 for $4,000 cash. Back then, this whole area was peach orchards and pine forests, long before Atlanta's sprawl transformed red clay into subdivisions. Every morning I walk the same crushed stone path Grandpa laid by hand, boots finding the worn grooves from 3 generations of fishermen. The dock planks feel solid and weathered beneath my feet, built from local pine that's darkened with age. Cicadas sing from the sweet gum trees, bass jump at dawn, blue herons fish from the cypress stumps. For 75 years, this place has been my family's retreat. Then the developers arrived. 12 years ago, they bought every parcel surrounding my property and erected Riverside Meadows 1,200 homes, starting at $750,000 each, with HOA dues running $300 monthly. They offered me $3.2 million to sell, wanted my lake as a centerpiece for their amenity package. I told them no. My land wasn't for sale at any price. Most of the new neighbors were decent people. Professionals who jogged past, waved, maybe asked about the fishing. Normal folks living their lives. Then, Margaret Sullivan bought the premium corner lot with direct lake views 18 months ago. 49 years old, corporate attorney turned real estate investor, drives a pearl white Cadillac Escalade detailed weekly. Every conversation contains phrases like property value optimization and aesthetic compliance standards. Margaret got herself elected HOA president within 4 months by promising to elevate community standards and protect property investments. Her first official act was creating a neighborhood enhancement committee with herself as chair. Within weeks, she was issuing violation notices for mailbox colors and hedge heights that were 1 inch over approved maximums. Her opening move against me came 2 months after taking office. Certified letter on HOA letterhead. My unsightly fishing activities were materially impairing neighboring properties' peaceful enjoyment and value retention. $900,000 she'd paid for that lake view, and watching me catch dinner was somehow destroying her investment. The legal threats escalated quickly. She claimed my dock violated aesthetic covenants that supposedly applied to all area properties, ignoring that my land predated her subdivision by 64 years. I called my attorney, Frank Morrison, who'd handled my business contracts for 2 decades. He didn't find it amusing. "Daniel," She's technically correct that your property isn't exempt, simply because it's older, he explained over the phone. However, her HOA has no jurisdiction over your land whatsoever. You were never part of the subdivision, never signed their covenants, and your property boundaries are clear. She's threatening you with authority she doesn't possess. When intimidation failed, Margaret filed a complaint with Fulton County claiming my dock was an unpermitted structure. The inspector drove out, examined my permits from 1,989, and closed the case within 20 minutes. But Margaret wasn't done. She escalated to continuous harassment. Every morning, I'd head to the dock around 5:30 a.m. when the base are feeding, and suddenly Margaret's property required emergency landscape maintenance. Industrial leaf blowers, chainsaw crews, commercial mowers, all screaming at maximum volume right along her property line. The diesel exhaust would drift across my lake, mixing with morning mist. Her crew logged enough overtime in 6 weeks to buy a new truck, all to spite one man trying to fish. But I kept fishing. Some principles are worth defending. What I didn't know was that Margaret's obsession was about to escalate from annoying to criminal. 3 weeks after the county dismissed her dock complaint, Margaret hired Anderson Surveying, the most expensive firm in Atlanta, to verify our property boundaries. Not because there was any legitimate question. My grandfather's concrete boundary markers are still standing, surveyed and recorded in 1948. This was harassment with a professional price tag. The surveyors arrived on a Tuesday morning with laser equipment worth more than my truck. I watched from my kitchen window as they spent 7 hours measuring boundaries that have been legally established for 75 years. 4 days later, Margaret's attorney sent me a registered letter claiming my dock extended approximately 6 to 8 inches onto community water access rights. But here's where Margaret revealed her true nature. She filed an actual lawsuit in Fulton County Superior Court for property encroachment over 6 inches of dock space that wasn't even on her property. While her legal papers moved through the system, she launched a social media offensive. Posted in the Riverside Meadows homeowners Facebook group about her difficult neighbor refusing to respect community standards. The comments section filled with people who'd never met me, deciding I was the Facebook neighborhood villain. I spent a weekend in the Fulton County courthouse basement, digging through old records. That's when I found something that made my hands shake. My grandfather's 1948 deed contained a paragraph I'd never paid attention to, including all water rights, surface and subsurface, to underground spring system and all tributaries thereof in perpetuity. I sat there, holding a 75-year-old document, slowly realizing what this meant. My grandfather hadn't just bought land, he'd bought the water rights. And that spring-fed lake on my property was part of an underground aquifer system. I pulled the Riverside Meadows development records from 2012. The developer's water usage permit showed they drilled residential wells, claiming independent sustainable water sources. Those wells tapped into the same aquifer feeding my lake, every single home. I called Frank Morrison from the parking lot. Frank, I need you to look at something. My grandfather's deed includes water rights language. Does that mean what I think it means? Long silence. Then, Daniel, send me photos of that deed immediately. If those water rights are properly recorded and the subdivision wells are drawing from that aquifer, you might own their water source. My heart was pounding. For 12 years, 1,200 families had potentially been using water that my grandfather's deed gave rights to. Not because they were bad people, they had no idea. The developer probably didn't even know those old water rights existed, but Margaret had picked a legal fight with someone who might legally control her water supply. The irony was significant, but I wasn't interested in revenge or bankrupting innocent people. I was interested in getting Margaret to leave me alone. I called Frank back. Before we do anything with this, I need to be absolutely certain. Can you recommend a hydrogeologist who can verify the aquifer connection? I know just the person, but Daniel, if this checks out, you're not just defending against a property dispute anymore. This changes everything. The next week, Dr. Stephen Marshall from Georgia Tech arrived with water testing equipment and ground-penetrating radar. He spent 3 days mapping the aquifer system, testing water samples, reviewing geological surveys. His report was clear. The underground spring feeding my lake was indeed the primary source for Riverside Meadows' well system. The water flowed through limestone channels from my property directly under their subdivision. The water rights claim in your grandfather's deed would likely hold up legally, Dr. Marshall explained, showing me the aquifer maps. But Daniel, I need to tell you something else. I tested your lake water as part of the survey. Are you aware there's chemical contamination present? My stomach dropped. What kind of contamination? Copper-based compounds consistent with algicides, not enough to be immediately dangerous, but definitely present. Have you treated your lake recently? Never. I don't use any chemicals. A cold feeling spread through my chest. How would copper get in there? Doctor? Marshall's expression darkened. Someone applied algicide. Given the concentration patterns, I'd say within the past month. Did you notice any changes in water color or smell? I thought back. There had been a slight greenish tint a few weeks ago that cleared up. I'd assumed it was natural algae bloom. Could that spread to the wells? Eventually, yes, through the aquifer system. We're talking months, not days. Underground water moves slowly through limestone. But if the contamination source isn't identified and stopped, it could reach the residential wells. I felt sick. Someone had put chemicals in my lake without my knowledge. If those chemicals spread through the aquifer to 1,200 homes, can you test for where it came from? I can test concentration patterns and estimate application point, but identifying who did it would require investigation, possibly security footage if you have any. I didn't have security cameras, but my neighbor across the street, Mr. Henderson, had installed a Ring doorbell 6 months ago that faced my property. That evening, I knocked on Henderson's door. Tom, this is going to sound strange, but would you be willing to check your doorbell footage from about 3 to 4 weeks ago? I think someone may have been on my property at night. Henderson, a retired insurance adjuster, raised an eyebrow. Someone messing with your place? Sure, let me check. What date range? We spent an hour reviewing footage. There it was. 2:23 a.m. on a Tuesday night. A truck with Premier Landscapes on the side pulling into my driveway. 2 figures with flashlights walking toward my lake. That's Margaret Sullivan's landscaping company, Henderson said quietly. Her husband Robert owns it. They're the ones who've been doing all that maintenance noise, right? My hands were shaking. Margaret or her husband had put chemicals in my lake on my property in the middle of the night. Tom, can you save that footage for me? And don't mention this to anyone yet. Already saved to cloud storage. Daniel, that's trespassing at minimum. What are you going to do? First, I'm calling my lawyer. Then we'll see. Frank Morrison's response was immediate. Don't confront her. Don't tell anyone except necessary professionals. We document everything, verify everything, and build an airtight case. If she contaminated your lake, and that contamination could spread to the subdivision wells, she's committed several crimes. But we do this right. Over the next 2 weeks, we assembled the evidence. Dr. Marshall confirmed the contamination was consistent with commercial algicide application. Henderson's ring footage showed Premier Landscapes on my property. County records showed Margaret had signed a check to Premier Landscapes for $2,800, dated 2 days before the footage, coded as Emergency Landscape Treatment in HOA records. I also discovered something else. Margaret had used HOA funds to pay for it. The invoice was buried in landscaping expense reports, but it was there. She'd used community money to contaminate my lake. Frank brought in Catherine Hayes, an environmental attorney from Atlanta. Daniel, this is more serious than simple vandalism, Catherine explained in her office. Unauthorized application of chemicals on someone else's property is illegal, dumping under Georgia law. If that contamination reaches the subdivision wells, and Dr. Marshall says it will, just slowly she's created a public health situation. How long before it reaches the wells, I asked. Doctor? Marshall estimates 4 to 6 months given the aquifer flow rate and limestone filtration. The contamination will dilute as it spreads, but it'll still be detectable. More importantly, if anyone tests those wells in 6 months and finds copper-based chemicals, the EPA will get involved. I sat back in my chair. So we have maybe 4 months before this becomes a crisis. Correct. Which gives us time to resolve this properly. Here's what I recommend. We file criminal charges for illegal dumping and trespassing. Simultaneously, we file civil charges for property damage. And we approach the HOA board, not Margaret, with information about the water rights and the contamination. Give them a chance to do the right thing. We also inform the county health department now, before the contamination spreads. That protects everyone and shows good faith on your part. It wasn't complete destruction of Margaret, but it was the right approach. Okay, let's do it properly. The next morning, Frank filed criminal complaints with the Fulton County Sheriff's Department for criminal trespass and illegal dumping. The evidence was solid: ring footage, chemical analysis, financial records. By afternoon, deputies had visited both Margaret Sullivan and Premier Landscapes to notify them of the investigation. That evening, I received a phone call from an unknown number. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Robert Sullivan. I need to speak with you urgently about a serious misunderstanding." "Mr. Sullivan, on advice of my attorney, I'm recording this call. Georgia is a one-party consent state. Please continue." Silence. Then, "My wife asked me to treat a pond on what she said was HOA property that was having an algae problem. I had no idea it was your lake. This was a complete mistake. A mistake that involved trespassing on my property at 2 a.m. with chemicals. Margaret told me it was HOA land. She said she'd verified it with the survey. Look, I'll pay for any damages. I'll clean up the lake. Just please don't press charges. This could destroy my business." I felt sympathy. He'd been manipulated by his own wife. But sympathy didn't excuse illegal dumping. "Mr. Sullivan, here's what's going to happen. The criminal investigation will proceed. However, I'm willing to accept restitution for the lake cleanup and damages. You'll need to work with my attorneys on that. As for your business, I suggest you consult your own lawyer about your wife's instructions." He hung up without responding. 20 minutes later, Margaret called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was harsh. "You'll regret this, Whitmore. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will bury you in legal fees and destroy your reputation in this community. Withdraw those charges immediately." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Frank. "Add harassment and witness intimidation to the list," he said. The next day, we met with the Riverside Meadows HOA board without Margaret present. Frank, Catherine, Dr. Marshall, and I sat across from 5 board members in the community center conference room. "Thank you for meeting with us," Frank began. "We have information that affects every homeowner in this subdivision, and we wanted to present it to you before it becomes a public crisis." Patricia Morgan, the board treasurer, leaned forward. "This is about Margaret's lawsuit against Mr. Whitmore?" "Partially, but it's much bigger than that." Frank laid out the evidence: the water rights deed, the aquifer connection, the contamination, the illegal dumping, and Margaret's use of HOA funds to pay for it. The board members' faces went from confusion to shock as they processed it all. Board President Tyler Morgan spoke first. "You're telling us that Margaret used HOA money to illegally dump chemicals on your property, which are now spreading toward our water supply?" "That's correct," Catherine said. "The contamination is currently minimal and will dilute as it spreads, but in approximately 4 to 6 months, trace amounts will likely be detectable in subdivision wells. We've already notified the county health department, which will begin monitoring." "And these water rights?" Patricia asked. "Are they actually enforceable?" "Almost certainly," Frank replied. "But Mr. Whitmore has no interest in disrupting 1,200 families. He's willing to grant permanent water usage rights to the subdivision in exchange for a reasonable settlement." Tyler Morgan looked exhausted. "What kind of settlement?" I spoke for the first time. "Margaret Sullivan resigns from the board immediately. She pays for complete lake remediation. Dr. Marshall estimates around $75,000. The HOA conducts a full audit of her financial management, and she drops her frivolous lawsuit against me. In exchange, I grant the subdivision permanent water usage rights, waive any claims for past usage, and we all move forward." "And the criminal charges?" Patricia asked. "Those are between Margaret, her husband, and the Fulton County District Attorney," Catherine said firmly. "We don't control that process. Justice needs to run its course." The board members looked at each other. Finally, Richard spoke. "We need to call an emergency board meeting tonight with Margaret. She deserves to hear the evidence and respond." "That's your prerogative," Frank said, "but we'd recommend you consult the HOA's attorney first. Margaret will likely try to control the narrative." That evening's emergency HOA board meeting was significant. Margaret arrived with her personal attorney, confident and combative. That confidence lasted approximately 10 minutes until the board presented the evidence. The ring footage, the chemical analysis, the financial records showing HOA funds used for landscape treatment on property that wasn't HOA land, Dr. Marshall's report on the aquifer contamination, and the 1,948 deed showing water rights. Margaret's attorney went pale. Margaret tried to maintain composure. This is clearly a setup. Whitmore contaminated his own lake to frame me. Those water rights are probably fake. Mrs. Sullivan, the HOA's attorney, interrupted. I've reviewed the deed. It's recorded with the county and appears legitimate, and the evidence of the dumping is substantial. I need to advise this board that the HOA faces significant legal exposure if Mrs. Sullivan was indeed acting with apparent authority while using HOA funds for illegal activities. The room fell silent. Finally, Patricia spoke. Margaret, I'm making a motion that you be removed as HOA president effective immediately and that you be suspended from the board pending completion of a full financial audit. All in favor? 4 hands went up immediately. Only 1 board member abstained. Margaret's face went from red to white to red again. You can't do this! I've done everything for this community. I've raised property values. You've allegedly committed crimes using community funds, Richard said quietly. We have no choice. Margaret stormed out, her attorney following. 3 days later, the Fulton County District Attorney's Office formally charged Margaret Sullivan with criminal trespass, illegal dumping of hazardous materials, and embezzlement of HOA funds. Her husband Robert was charged with illegal dumping, though prosecutors indicated they were considering reduced charges given evidence he'd been misled about the property ownership. Margaret's response was to escalate her attacks. She hired a prominent Atlanta defense attorney and filed countersuits against me for malicious prosecution, against the HOA board for unlawful termination, and against Henderson for illegal surveillance. She launched a social media campaign claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. She created sock puppet accounts posting in the Riverside Meadows Facebook group about my suspicious timing in discovering the water rights and claiming I must have contaminated my own lake. Some residents believed her. I started getting hostile looks at the grocery store. Someone spray-painted "liar" on my mailbox. But the evidence was overwhelming. The DA's office had the ring footage. The chemical analysis showing the compounds matched exactly what Premier Landscapes had purchased, and the financial records. Margaret's own check had her signature. More importantly, the county health department began monthly testing of subdivision wells. At month 3, the first trace amounts of copper compounds appeared in wells on the eastern edge of the subdivision, exactly where Dr. Marshall had predicted the aquifer flow would carry it first. The levels were still well below EPA danger thresholds, but they were detectable and increasing. The health department issued an advisory. Trace chemical contamination detected in residential wells. Current levels are not dangerous, but residents with concerns should consider water filtration systems. Investigation ongoing into contamination source. That's when the subdivision panic started. Parents worried about their children. Property values began dropping. The Facebook group exploded with hundreds of posts. And Margaret's narrative collapsed. Because the contamination pattern exactly matched what Dr. Marshall had predicted months earlier, spreading from my lake through the aquifer to the subdivision. Margaret tried one final desperate move. She appeared at my house on a Thursday evening, without her attorney, without witnesses. Just her, dressed casually, carrying a leather portfolio. Daniel, we need to talk. Neighbor to neighbor. I stayed on my porch, didn't invite her in. Margaret, you're facing criminal charges. You shouldn't be here. Just hear me out. She opened the portfolio. I made mistakes, I'll admit that, but this has gotten out of control. I'm prepared to offer you $200,000 to drop all civil claims and to testify that you may have been mistaken about the contamination source. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're trying to bribe me to lie for you? I'm trying to reach a settlement that works for everyone. Think about it. $200,000. You could upgrade this whole property. And really, can anyone prove exactly where the contamination came from? There could have been multiple sources. Margaret, get off my property right now. You're making a mistake. I have connections in this county. I can make your life very difficult. I'm recording this conversation, I said clearly. Georgia is a one-party consent state. You've just offered me money to provide false testimony in a criminal investigation. That's bribery and attempted witness tampering. Now leave before I call the police. She went pale, snapped the portfolio shut, and left. I immediately sent the recording to Frank Morrison in the DA's office. The next day, additional charges were filed: attempted bribery and attempted witness tampering. Margaret's defense attorney withdrew from her case. Her husband Robert filed for separation and moved out with their 2 children. The HOA board's financial audit revealed she'd used over $15,000 in HOA funds for personal legal expenses and neighborhood enhancement projects that couldn't be documented. Additional embezzlement charges were filed. Margaret's real estate law license was suspended pending the criminal proceedings. Everything she'd built, her reputation, her marriage, her career was collapsing because she couldn't accept one simple fact: her authority ended at her property line. The trial took 8 months to reach court. By then, the copper contamination in subdivision wells had peaked at month 6 and was slowly declining as the aquifer flushed and fresh spring water diluted it. No one had gotten sick. The levels never reached dangerous thresholds, but dozens of families had installed water filtration systems costing thousands of dollars. Margaret Sullivan pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a plea deal: reckless endangerment, embezzlement, and attempted witness tampering. The illegal dumping and bribery charges were dropped in exchange for her cooperation. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with possibility of serving 9 months with good behavior, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution, $75,000 for my lake remediation, $42,000 to the HOA for misused funds, and $10,000 to the county for investigation costs. Her husband Robert pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor illegal dumping charge, paid a $5,000 fine, and was sentenced to 200 hours of community service with environmental cleanup organizations. The judge accepted that he'd been genuinely misled about the property ownership, though noted he should have verified before applying chemicals. The Riverside Meadows HOA board, under new leadership, reached a settlement with me. They granted easement rights for the water usage in perpetuity, established an environmental monitoring program funded by HOA dues, and invited me to join a newly created Property Rights Protection Committee to ensure future boards wouldn't overstep their authority. The community center meeting where we finalized the settlement had about 200 residents in attendance. Board President Patricia Morgan explained everything: the water rights history, the contamination incident, and the settlement terms. There was anger at Margaret at the previous board for not providing oversight, but there was also relief that it was resolved without bankrupting anyone. One mother stood up during public comment. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to apologize. I believed Margaret's version of events and said terrible things about you on Facebook. I'm sorry. Thank you for not punishing all of us for her crimes." Several others echoed similar sentiments. I stood at the microphone and said simply, "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to fish in peace on my family's land. We're all neighbors. Let's move forward." The lake remediation took 14 months. Dr. Marshall supervised the process: water cycling, introduction of natural filtering plants, careful monitoring. By month 10, the copper levels were back to 0. By month 14, I was restocking fish. The bays are thriving now. I've got one I call Churchill 2, who's already pushing 5 pounds. The subdivision wells fully cleared by month 9. The county health department lifted all advisories. Property values gradually recovered. Life returned to normal, though Riverside Meadows residents now had a different understanding of property rights, HOA limitations, and the importance of oversight. I still fish most mornings from that dock my grandfather built. The wood is weathered and smooth, worn by 3 generations of boots. The bass jump at dawn. Blue herons nest in the cypress trees. And sometimes, on Saturday mornings, I see kids from the subdivision fishing from the public access point the HOA created on their side of the lake, teaching their children what my grandfather taught me. Margaret Sullivan served 9 months in county jail, was released on probation, and moved out of state. Her real estate law license was permanently revoked. Her marriage ended in divorce. The last I heard, she was working in property management in Tennessee under her maiden name. I don't take any joy in her downfall. She destroyed her own life through arrogance and an inability to accept that she didn't control everything around her, all because she couldn't tolerate watching someone fish on his own property. The case set precedent in Georgia water rights law. 3 similar cases have cited our settlement as a model for balancing historical property rights with modern development needs. Frank Morrison presented at a state bar conference about it. Dr. Marshall uses it as a teaching case at Georgia Tech about aquifer contamination and property law intersections. And the HOA reform legislation that passed last year? It was partially inspired by what happened here. New Georgia law requires HOAs to verify jurisdictional authority before taking enforcement action, establishes personal liability for board members who use HOA funds for unauthorized purposes, and creates whistleblower protections for residents reporting board misconduct. One woman's vindictive obsession led to systemic change, protecting thousands of future homeowners from similar abuse. I suppose that's something. Here's what I learned through all of this. Document everything. Know your property rights better than anyone else. Build relationships with good neighbors like Henderson who'll back you up when it matters. Don't let bullies make you abandon your principles, but also don't escalate when you can resolve things properly. And sometimes, the best outcome isn't defeating your enemy, it's ensuring they can't hurt anyone else. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for what's right has costs and benefits you can't predict. It cost me sleep, stress, money, and months of my life. But it protected 1,200 families from a contamination crisis that could have been much worse, reformed HOA laws, and reminded people that property rights still mean something. Margaret wanted to drive me off my land because my existence annoyed her. Instead, she drove herself to prison and inspired legal reforms that protect property owners across Georgia. The lake is cleaner now than it's been in decades, the community is stronger, and I still fish every morning, just like my grandfather did 75 years ago. Your turn. Have you dealt with HOA overreach or property rights violations? Share your story. Real experiences create real change, and knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more. Next week, the city councilman who tried using eminent domain to steal a veteran's land until that veteran uncovered the councilman's own zoning violations. Remember, whether you're in Georgia, Texas, California, or anywhere else, your property rights matter. Communities are stronger than corrupt systems. Truth is more powerful than deception. Sometimes, one person standing up for what's right changes everything. Thanks for watching. Now protect what's yours.